Hello, it's Philip Taylor speaking from Richmond Green Chambers in London. This afternoon, with the sun moving round, it's getting a bit later now. I'm looking at a book which is one of my favourite books of the year. I don't know why it is in some respects. I've looked at a huge number of books. I suppose I've reviewed something in the region of about 200 books this year. It's been a lot of reviews. It's been a very busy year for me. It's Christmas now and I'm just reviewing this book which came to me from LexisNexis. They asked me to have a look at it. We'd reviewed a book, the first volume of this book, Cases That Changed Our Lives, Volume 1, some while back now, and Volume 2's now come out. It's under the general editorship of Ian McDougall with James Wilson, and it's got a team of specialist contributors, and it comes from LexisNexis. Now, Elizabeth, my wife, and I have written a review of this book, and this is the title I've given it. Be you ever so high, the law is above you. That's in quotes. Here's a most welcome new collection of cases which have created our common law of today. Now, we'll get into that title in a minute of what I've got, but there's the nice front cover. I wonder who that might be. That is Louisa Carlill, and there's her little smoke ball. Now, if you've seen me on television, you will have seen me show what the smoke ball looks like in the Victorian Pharmacy on BBC Two. But there's Louisa as a young lady who buys a smoke ball because she's had flu. She tries to use it, and we're getting onto that in a minute. This is the back, this is the spine, and the back of the book. And before I talk about anything else, I'm going to say that this book is being sold on behalf of Stop the Traffic. And it's about this campaign to stop people being trafficked. So it's about slavery. And I think it's £2 of every copy, no, £1 of every copy is going to that organisation. And I think it's a very valid organisation. It's the first article in the European Convention on Human Rights, an important article at that. Now, there's a little bit about the campaign itself, enough of the advertising on the campaign. You'll know what I'm talking about, anyone involved in this. Now, this is the index at the back of the book. There are a lot of particular fascinating cases. There's a final word mentioning Professor H.L.A. Hart. And there's a little quote. I've given you a quote at the front, which is from Denning, but this is a quote in 2014 about the extent of the book itself, whether in fact cases have been dealt with in the correct way. This is talking about positivism and the separation of law and morals, written in 1958, so it goes back a bit. But what we're looking at here with cases that changed our lives is the historic significance of some of these cases. And I think that's very important as a teacher of law. I have to tell learners, as I now call them, students, to tell them, there's a forward there, about King Charles I, to look at the case in the light of its history, where it comes in our society, what year, and the views of the time. And Lord Thomas, the current Lord Chief Justice, gives a most charming introduction. I thought it was really a very effective forward to the book. Then there's a preface. Then you've got after that from Ian McDougall explaining various things. Then you've got all the contributors mentioned, and there are a lot of contributors. And I'm only going to take a couple of examples. These are the contributors, more of them. And then at the end, there we go. Then we've got the contents itself. Now, part one, you can see, I'm going to just hold that up. You can see what's in it and how it runs through historically what we've actually got. Anyone who's interested in history, and certainly English legal history, and I don't mean the really heavy stuff, I mean the more personal stuff, will find it fascinating. There are 5 parts. There's the second part. And they've got a whole load. And of course the one I really liked was When Louisa Carlill Caught the Flu. Carlill versus the Carbolic Smoke Ball Company, written by John Randall, Queen's Counsel. A particularly important one for me, and I think for many, because when I started law, that was one of the first big cases I ever looked at. And that's probably the same for most people. There'll be 2. One is Carlill, and the other is Donahue and Stevenson. Now, there are all the others, but those are the 2 big ones, and you can't get away from it. Now, I have a soft spot for Louisa Carlill and the wonderful story about what happened and what happened to Asquith, who represented the Carbolic Smoke Ball Company. But the principle of law is there and all the things that flow from it. And that's the beauty of our common law. Now let me talk about the book itself and our review. Because when I said, be you ever so high, the law is above you, that quote comes from Denning. So it's always worthwhile quoting Lord Denning. His most famous utterance probably in the Gouriet case in 1977. Be you ever so high, the law is above you. And I'm not going to try and do it in his nice Hampshire lilt, but I can just imagine him saying it. The sentiments which go back such a long way mentioned here, they go to the trial of Charles I on the 20th of January 1649, and the aftermath of the centuries which followed created modern English common law, which we then gave to the world. It's the greatest common law system the world's ever seen, and it will remain so because that's the way it's been designed. It's lasting, and that's the importance of why these cases change the way we think. They change in terms of the periods of history, and they change concerning the way we view ourselves, our relationships with people, with property, and what we're doing in technology and everything else. So it governs everything that we're doing in life, and that's the beauty, of course, of the law. It affects everything we do, effectively. So let me continue. This excellent new book, and you gather I love the book, is by Ian McDougall and James Wilson. It has a huge team with a wonderful insight into how we've arrived at today's jurisprudence. We were particularly touched by the motivation, as I say, of the authors and publisher to donate money to the Stop the Traffic organisation. That's to prevent human trafficking from sales of the volume, which we can confirm will be well received again. So the editor and colleagues need not fret. I think there was some concern whether this book, in the first volume, would have been particularly well received by people. Well, actually it has. Because, as I said before, people are always interested in the personalities, the individuals of any case, because that's what makes case law so interesting. It's not just about boring rules and regulations, it's about people. And when you're representing them in court and cross-examining, you've got live people there telling lies and all the other things they do. And it's all part and parcel of the human condition. Now, the story of the cases that changed what we do will never, in our view, be complete, as I say, without the splendid Louisa Carlill of Smokeball fame, whose delightful cartoon, it's there, a lovely dress sense we have there for the cartoon itself. It's a delightful cartoon image which appears on the front cover, and for very many law students, as I've said, we suspect that Mrs Carlill's little adventure will remain of special significance, it does to us, as one of the first big cases we studied. So do read chapter 18 on page 181 if you don't do anything else. I particularly like that because it gave me, every time I look at it, it gives me a fresh insight. And that's the same with some of the other cases that are mentioned. And I think probably for someone who's actually now a practitioner, reflecting back on what they did in the past when they were studying, may find this quite interesting. But you've got to be a bit of an enthusiast for law, probably, to want to do that. Now, Lord Thomas, the current Lord Chief Justice, rightly says that that one can only touch on some of the decisions and issues raised in the collection and the chapters because they do repay careful reading and rereading. Why? Well, when you teach law, as I've said, it's always useful to have both the historic context and the general dates of when decisions are made. Because, as we've said in other reviews, and I've submitted this as an opinion, certainly on occasion, or a submission I should say, rather than an opinion, today's dissenting judgment is tomorrow's good law. Well, sometimes anyway, and that's an important thing to bear in mind because we do change our views. Look at the way we've changed our views on same-sex marriages, homosexuality, abortion, all these things. Big changes taking place, so it's important to bear that in mind. So the diligent student is going to be able, from something like this, to dissect the case law and see how leading authorities really do change our lives today because of the precedents that they've created. As McDougall says, these volumes have the deliberate intention of not merely being case reports solely of interest to lawyers, because they're not. They're much wider than that. I think they have historic interest, and I think they're a general readership of interest as well, to people who might have a problem in a particular area and think, oh, let's read about that, see what's happened. So it is important. What the team do, and there are a lot of people involved in this, they bring into focus the people involved and the consequences, which, as any student of tort will know, makes that human element all the more enriching as we're dealing with real people, such as those we cross-examine in court, which is probably the most interesting and exhilarating part of any trial. And that's because these are about people, it's personal. And that, of course, is that's the reason why tort is such an interesting subject, because of what the subject matter is actually about. From the feedback received from the first volume, this new collection enhances the reason why we have the rule of law in England and Wales today. And it also illustrates why it's the soundest legal system we can actually have, and why it's been exported so widely around the world. Remember that, because you've got to be practical, and common law, the cases, that is the practical element. Otherwise you have a rigidity which makes it extremely difficult to change things. And if you go back to the Statute of Westminster 2, all those years ago in Consumer Like Casu, you will know what I'm talking about.